The camera shutter clicked 3 times in rapid succession before I realized what I'd captured. My hands trembled as I reviewed the digital display, zooming in on faces I'd been tracking for weeks. Senator Harrison stood beside a man whose photograph decorated multiple FBI wanted posters, their handshake frozen in pixelated clarity against the backdrop of the Sapphire Casino's private dining room. This was it. The evidence I needed to expose the money laundering operation that had been filtering millions through legitimate businesses across the city. I should have left immediately. Should have walked straight out of the building and driven directly to my editor's office. But journalism had taught me to be thorough, and thoroughness meant getting one more angle, one more shot that would make the story undeniable. I repositioned myself behind the ornamental plant that had provided cover for the past 40 minutes, adjusting my telephoto lens for a clearer view of the documents being exchanged. That's when I heard my name. "Samantha, I know you're here." Ryan's voice carried across the marble lobby below, each syllable dripping with the false sweetness I'd learned to fear during our 2 years together. 4 months. I'd managed to stay hidden for 4 months after fleeing our apartment with nothing but my camera bag and the clothes I'd been wearing. 4 months of looking over my shoulder, sleeping in cheap motels under fake names, paying for everything in cash. 4 months of freedom that apparently ended today. My throat constricted as I peered over the balcony railing. He stood near the reception desk, scanning the upper floors with methodical precision. The same expensive suit he'd always preferred. Charcoal gray with knife-edge creases. The same haircut maintained every 2 weeks without fail. But his face held something new. A hardness around his eyes that made my stomach clench with recognition. This wasn't the man who'd once brought me flowers after work. This was the man who'd broken 2 of my ribs when I'd suggested we spend Christmas apart. The receptionist said a journalist came up here about an hour ago. Ryan's voice grew louder as he moved toward the elevator bank. Dark hair, green eyes, carrying camera equipment. That sounds exactly like you, doesn't it? I backed away from the railing, my camera suddenly feeling like an anchor weighing me down. The service elevator was too far away, and the main elevators would deliver me directly into his line of sight. The stairwell required passing through the lobby. Every escape route led straight to him. Panic clouded my judgment as I scanned the hallway for anywhere to hide. Office doors lined both sides, most displaying frosted glass with company names etched in elegant script. Financial consultants, law firms, import-export businesses. All closed for the evening except one at the very end of the hall, where light spilled through a partially open door. I didn't think. Couldn't think. Survival instinct propelled me forward, my footsteps muffled by thick carpeting as I ran toward that light, like a moth drawn to flame. Behind me, I heard the elevator chime, heard Ryan's footsteps emerging onto the 10th floor. The office door swung wider as I shoved through it, and I immediately realized my mistake. This wasn't an empty conference room or unoccupied workspace. 3 men occupied the space, 2 standing flanking the sides like sentinels, 1 seated behind a massive desk that dominated the room. All 3 turned toward me with identical expressions of cold assessment. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," I stammered, already backing toward the door. "Wrong office, I'll just lock it." The man behind the desk spoke without raising his voice, yet his words carried absolute authority. One of the standing men moved with fluid efficiency, turning the deadbolt with a decisive click that echoed through the sudden silence. My hand was still on the doorknob when Ryan's fist hammered against the wood. "Samantha, open this door right now." His voice had shifted from false sweetness to barely contained rage. "We need to talk. I don't think the lady wants to talk to you." The man behind the desk rose, and I got my first clear look at him. He was younger than I'd initially thought. Mid-30s, perhaps, with black hair styled away from a face that could have been carved from marble. Broad shoulders filled out a suit that probably cost more than my car, the fabric moving with him as he circled the desk with predatory grace. But it was his eyes that held me frozen, dark brown and utterly cold, assessing me with the same intensity one might evaluate a chess piece mid-game. "This is between me and my girlfriend," Ryan shouted through the door. "Just a misunderstanding. Ex-girlfriend," I whispered, though I wasn't sure why I felt compelled to correct him to this stranger. The man's gaze sharpened. "Interesting." He gestured to one of his sentinels. "Joseph, please escort the gentleman from the building, quietly." Joseph moved to open the door, and I instinctively stepped back, putting the desk between myself and Ryan. But when Joseph opened the door just wide enough to slip through, closing it firmly behind him, I heard only muffled voices followed by the distinctive sound of footsteps retreating down the hallway. "He'll be gone within 5 minutes," the man said, returning to his desk as if he'd just dealt with something as mundane as a misdelivered package. "Marco will ensure he reaches the parking garage without incident." I should have thanked him. Should have apologized again for the intrusion and left as quickly as possible. Instead, I stood frozen, my camera bag sliding off my shoulder to land with a soft thump against the floor. My hands, which had been steady enough to photograph criminals, now shook violently as adrenaline crashed through my system. "Sit down before you fall down." It wasn't quite an order, but close enough that my knees bent automatically, depositing me into one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "Water? Please." My voice came out hoarse, barely recognizable. He poured from a crystal decanter, the liquid clear and cold as he placed the glass in my trembling hands. I drank deeply, focusing on the chill sliding down my throat rather than the man watching me with unnerving intensity. "Samantha." He spoke my name like he was testing it. "That's what he called you." "Yes." I set the glass down carefully. "I'm Samantha Collins. Thank you for whatever you did. I should go." "You should." He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "But you won't make it to your car before he finds you again." Men like that don't take rejection well. The accuracy of his observation sent ice through my veins. "How would you know what kind of man he is?" "Because I know men." His expression remained neutral. "I know the ones who think with their fists, the ones who believe possession equals ownership, the ones who can't accept losing what they consider theirs." My camera bag had fallen open when it hit the floor, and now my camera lay partially visible, its lens cap detached, memory card slot still open from my hasty review of the photographs. The man's gaze drifted to it, then back to my face. "You're a photographer." "Journalist," I corrected automatically. "Investigative reporter for the Metropolitan Daily." Something flickered behind his eyes. "Investigating what exactly?" "I can't discuss active investigations." The professional response came automatically, even as my brain screamed at me to stop talking, to leave, to run before this situation became more complicated than it already was. Admirable ethics. He rose again, moving around the desk toward my fallen camera bag. "May I?" Every instinct said to refuse, but he was already crouching, already lifting the camera with careful hands that suggested familiarity with expensive equipment. He turned it on, the display illuminating his face as he reviewed the images stored in memory. I watched his expression shift from casual interest to sharp focus. "Where did you take these?" "I told you I can't." "Casino Sapphire. Tonight." He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than cold assessment in his eyes. Concern, perhaps, or calculation. "Do you have any idea who these people are?" "Senator Harrison and several unidentified associates." I reached for the camera, but he held it just out of reach. "Which is exactly why I need those photographs. That's evidence of corruption at the highest levels. That's evidence of your death warrant." He clicked through more images, his jaw tightening with each frame. "This man here, the one shaking Harrison's hand, his name is Victor Castillo. He runs the Cartel del Golfo's North American operations. The woman in the red jacket is his accountant. The 3 men in the background are enforcers." My mouth went dry. "How do you know that?" "Because it's my business to know who operates in this city." He handed the camera back to me finally, but his expression had gone cold again. "And you just photographed one of the most dangerous organizations on this coast, conducting illegal business with corrupt politicians. They will find out. They will identify you. And they will ensure you never publish those photographs." "Are you threatening me?" I stood, clutching my camera against my chest like a shield. "I'm stating facts." He moved to the window, hands in his pockets as he gazed out at the city lights beginning to illuminate the darkening sky. "Victor Castillo has eliminated journalists before. 3 in Mexico City, 2 in Houston, 1 in Los Angeles. All within the past 5 years. All before their stories could be published." The room felt suddenly airless. "Then I'll go to the police." And tell them what? That you have photographs of people having dinner? That's not illegal, Miss Collins. You need context, documentation, proof of actual crimes, which means investigation, which means time. Time you don't have once they identify you. How would they identify me? But even as I asked, I knew. Cameras in the casino. Security footage showing me positioning myself with my telephoto lens. Witness accounts from staff who might have noticed a woman spending too long behind a decorative plant. You have 24 hours before Victor's people put your name together with your face. He turned from the window. 48 at most. What's your plan? I had no plan. The story had consumed me for 3 weeks. Every spare moment devoted to tracking money transfers, photographing key players, building a case that would finally make my editor take me seriously as more than just a features writer covering charity galas and restaurant openings. I thought about the article, the accolades, possibly even an award. I hadn't thought about dying. I'll leave the city, I said finally. Take what I have to the FBI. Let them handle it. The FBI will bury your evidence in bureaucracy for months while they build their own case. Meanwhile, you'll be exactly where? Witness protection has holes. Safe houses get compromised. Federal agents take bribes. Then what am I supposed to do? The question came out sharper than intended. You're telling me I'm going to die, but offering no alternatives. Should I just destroy the evidence and pretend I saw nothing? I'm offering you protection. He said it simply, as if proposing lunch, rather than upending my entire life. Stay somewhere secure until the situation can be properly managed. Let me handle Victor Castillo. Handle him how? That's not your concern. It absolutely is my concern if I'm supposed to trust you with my life. I moved toward the door, suddenly desperate to escape this conversation, this office, this man who spoke about murder and cartels with the same tone others used to discuss weather patterns. I don't even know who you are. Alessandro Ricci. He moved between me and the door with speed that shouldn't have been possible for someone his size. And yes, you should absolutely question whether to trust me. But first, ask yourself this. Who are you more afraid of? Your ex-boyfriend, who you're clearly running from. Victor Castillo, who will kill you for those photographs. Or me, who just offered you a way to survive both of them. The deadbolt clicked as Marco unlocked the door from outside, opening it just enough to lean in. He's in his car, heading east on 7th. Joseph is following to make sure he actually leaves. Alessandro nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. Give her space to think, Marco. The door closed again, leaving us in renewed silence. I should have walked through it. Should have taken my chances with Ryan, with Victor Castillo, with whatever consequences my investigation brought down on my head. Instead, I heard myself asking, why would you help me? Because Victor Castillo's organization crossed into my territory without permission. That makes him a problem I need to solve anyway. Alessandro returned to his desk, pulling out a business card and writing something on the back. Consider your situation a convenient opportunity to handle multiple issues simultaneously. He held out the card. I took it, noting the embossed name on the front and the address written in precise handwriting on the back. What is this? A safe location. My people will take you there tonight if you choose to accept my offer. You'll have complete security. Everything you need. Time to decide your next move without looking over your shoulder every 5 seconds. And what do you want in return? Delay publishing your story for 3 months. Give me time to dismantle Victor's operation here in a way that won't blow back on you. After that, you'll have your exclusive story, and you'll be alive to write it. 3 months. 12 weeks of hiding, of depending on a stranger, of living in some secured location under the protection of a man who spoke about cartels and territory with intimate familiarity. Everything in my professional training said to refuse, to maintain independence, to never compromise journalistic integrity by accepting help from questionable sources. But I was 28 years old with an ex-boyfriend who'd put me in the emergency room twice, standing in the office of a man whose last name I recognized from crime reports, holding photographs that apparently marked me for death by one of the most violent organizations in North America. Independence seemed suddenly less important than survival. 3 months, I repeated. And then I publish everything. Everything, he agreed. Though I recommend changing names to protect certain sources. Meaning yourself. Meaning practical reality. Some stories are more important than bylines, Miss Collins. He extended his hand. Do we have an agreement? I stared at his hand for a long moment, knowing that shaking it would change everything, would pull me into a world I'd only observed from safe distances while researching articles. But the alternative was going back to my studio apartment alone, waiting for either Ryan to find me again, or Victor Castillo's people to make their move. I shook his hand. His grip was warm, firm, exactly what I'd expected from someone who commanded rooms with mere presence. Good. He released my hand and gestured to Marco. Take Miss Collins to the penthouse. Tell Sophia we have a guest for the foreseeable future. Full security protocol. Wait, tonight? I clutched my camera bag. I have things at my apartment, clothes, research materials, which will be retrieved tomorrow with appropriate security. Alessandro was already turning his attention to papers on his desk, effectively dismissing me. Tonight, you need to not be at any location your ex-boyfriend or the cartel might anticipate. Marco will take you somewhere. Neither of them will think to look. I followed Marco toward the door, my mind still reeling from everything that had happened in the past 20 minutes. At the threshold, I turned back. Why did you really help me? The truth this time. Alessandro looked up, his expression unreadable. Because you ran into my office instead of cowering in a bathroom stall. That kind of survival instinct interests me. He paused. And because you're about to become very useful in ways you don't yet understand. The words should have terrified me. Should have sent me running despite the dangers waiting outside. Instead, I found myself following Marco to the elevator, my hand tight around the camera strap, wondering exactly what kind of bargain I'd just made with Alessandro Ricci. The penthouse occupied the entire 42nd floor of a building I'd photographed once for an article about architectural preservation. From the outside, it looked like a dozen other pre-war structures clustered in the financial district, elegant but unremarkable. From the inside, it resembled something from a design magazine I couldn't afford to subscribe to. Marco had escorted me through a private entrance, bypassing the main lobby entirely, and delivered me via elevator that required both a key card and a fingerprint scan. The doors had opened directly into the apartment, revealing a space so carefully curated it almost felt like a museum exhibit rather than somewhere people actually lived. White walls stretched toward ceilings that had to be at least 12 feet high. Floor-to-ceiling windows dominated the far wall, offering a view of the city that probably looked spectacular during daylight. The furniture followed a minimalist aesthetic. All clean lines and muted colors, grays and creams, and the occasional accent of deep charcoal. Everything looked expensive in that quiet way that didn't need to announce itself. Miss Collins. A woman emerged from what I assumed was the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She appeared to be in her late 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled into a neat bun, and sharp eyes that assessed me with the same efficiency I'd seen in Alessandro and his men. I'm Sophia. I manage this household. Samantha, please. I shifted my camera bag to my other shoulder, suddenly aware of how disheveled I must look after an evening spent hiding behind decorative plants and running from my ex-boyfriend. I'm sorry to intrude on your evening. You're not intruding. Mr. Ricci called ahead to explain the situation. She moved closer, her expression softening slightly. You look exhausted. Let me show you to your room, and then we can discuss anything you might need. I followed her down a hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than my student loans. My room turned out to be larger than my entire studio apartment, with a king-sized bed that looked like it had never been slept in, and another wall of windows overlooking the city. An ensuite bathroom featured marble surfaces, and a shower with enough settings to launch a spacecraft. There are basics in the bathroom, Sophia said, opening the closet to reveal it already stocked with clothes still bearing tags. Mr. Ricci had me prepare several options since he wasn't sure of your exact size. Black pants, a cream sweater, and there's a coral dress if you need something more formal. Tomorrow we can arrange for anything else you require. I stared at the clothes, my journalist's instinct immediately questioning how Alessandro had determined my size with such accuracy. He planned this. Before I even agreed to come here, Mr. Ricci plans for many contingencies. Sophia's tone remained neutral. Are you hungry? I can prepare something light if you haven't eaten. My stomach answered before I could, growling audibly in the quiet room. I couldn't remember my last meal. Lunch, maybe. A sandwich consumed while reviewing surveillance footage at my desk. Something light would be wonderful, thank you. I'll bring a tray to the sitting room in 20 minutes. That should give you time to freshen up. She paused at the door. Miss Collins, I don't know the details of why you're here, but I've worked for Mr. Ricci for 15 years. Whatever protection he's offered you, he will honor that commitment. You're safe in this house. The door closed softly behind her, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a closet full of clothes that fit perfectly, despite having been purchased by strangers. I showered quickly, washing away the sweat and fear from the evening, and dressed in the black pants and cream sweater Sophia had mentioned. They fit as precisely as I'd feared they would, which raised questions I wasn't sure I wanted answers to. The sitting room Sophia had referenced turned out to be a smaller space off the main living area, furnished with comfortable leather chairs and a sofa that faced yet another window. A coffee table held a tray bearing soup that smelled like tomatoes and fresh basil, crusty bread, and a glass of red wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I ate mechanically, tasting nothing, my mind racing through everything that had happened since I'd pressed the shutter button on my camera 4 hours ago. Senator Harrison's face in those photographs. Victor Castillo's name spoken with casual certainty by Alessandro Ricci. Ryan's voice calling my name through the building like a hunter tracking prey. You're overthinking. Alessandro's voice startled me badly enough that I nearly dropped my wine glass. He stood in the doorway of the sitting room, having apparently materialized from nowhere. He'd removed his suit jacket, his white shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows in a gesture that should have made him look more casual, but somehow achieved the opposite effect. How long have you been standing there? I set the glass down carefully. Long enough to watch you eat an entire bowl of soup without appearing to taste a single spoonful. He moved into the room, pouring himself wine from a decanter on the sideboard. Not hungry or too worried to notice food? Both. Neither. I rubbed my temples, feeling the beginning of a headache building behind my eyes. I'm trying to process the fact that my entire life just imploded in the space of an evening. Not imploded. Complicated. He settled into the chair across from me, his posture relaxed despite the lateness of the hour. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, I've just placed myself under the protection of a man whose organization I've been researching for a feature article about organized crime in metropolitan areas. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe. You researched me. I research everyone. It's my job. I met his gaze directly, refusing to look away despite the intensity of his attention. Alessandro Ricci, 34 years old, son of Giovanni Ricci, who built a business empire before his death 8 years ago. You inherited control of multiple legitimate enterprises, restaurants, real estate holdings, import companies. You also inherited something considerably less legitimate, though no charges have ever been filed against you personally. Thorough. He sipped his wine. What else did your research uncover? That you're either very good at what you do, or very good at not getting caught. Possibly both. I leaned forward slightly. What I couldn't find is why someone in your position would risk exposing himself to help a journalist who stumbled into his office by accident. I told you. Victor Castillo is operating in my territory without permission. That's not the whole truth. No, he agreed easily. But it's all you need to know for now. The casual dismissal should have irritated me. Instead, I found myself studying him more carefully, noting the way he held himself, the controlled precision of his movements, the intelligence evident in every calculated word. This was someone who revealed nothing by accident, who treated information like currency to be spent judiciously. Tell me about your ex-boyfriend. The subject change caught me off guard. How long were you together? Why does that matter? Context matters. I need to understand all the threats against you to properly neutralize them. He set his wine glass aside. How long, Samantha? The use of my first name felt intimate in a way I hadn't anticipated. 2 years. We met at a restaurant where I was working as a server while finishing my journalism degree. He was a regular customer, always friendly, always generous with tips. We started dating 6 months before I graduated. When did it turn violent? How did you know? But of course he knew. He'd seen my panic when Ryan appeared, had watched me literally run away rather than face a conversation. About 8 months in. Little things at first. grabbing my arm too hard during arguments, pushing me against walls. Then it escalated. You left him 4 months ago. Yes. I didn't ask how he knew that detail. He broke 2 of my ribs during an argument about spending Christmas with friends instead of his family. I waited until he left for a business trip, packed what I could carry, and disappeared. But not well enough, apparently. Obviously not. I stood, moving to the window to put distance between us. I've been careful. Different hotels every few nights, paying cash, avoiding my usual haunts. I have no idea how he found me tonight. Your investigation. Alessandro joined me at the window, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. You've been tracking money through the Sapphire Casino for 3 weeks, according to the metadata on your photographs. Someone there noticed. Word gets around. You looked at my photographs that thoroughly? I look at everything thoroughly. It's why I'm still alive. He turned to face me, and I found myself trapped between his body and the glass at my back. Victor Castillo's people will do the same thing. They'll trace your presence at the casino, review security footage, identify you through facial recognition software. They're probably already working on it. My mouth went dry. How long do I have? Joseph is monitoring their communications. Best estimate is 24 hours before they have your name, 48 before they have your address and employment details. His voice remained calm, matter of fact, as if discussing weather patterns rather than my potential murder. Your ex-boyfriend presents a separate problem. Marco followed him to a private investigation firm downtown. He's hired someone to locate you. Of course he has. I closed my eyes, feeling walls closing in from multiple directions. So I have a cartel assassin and a private investigator both trying to find me. Is that what you're saying? That's exactly what I'm saying. Which brings us back to my proposal. He stepped away, giving me space to breathe again. 3 months under my protection while I handle Victor Castillo's operation. In exchange, you delay publication and eventually get exclusive access to a story bigger than corrupt senators having dinner with criminals. What story? The complete dismantling of Cartel del Golfo's North American operations. Names, dates, financial transactions, everything you'd need for a Pulitzer-worthy investigation. He moved to refill his wine glass. I can give you that story, Samantha. But only if you're alive to write it. And how exactly do you plan to dismantle an entire cartel operation? By making it no longer profitable for them to operate in this region. By cutting their financial pipelines, eliminating their distribution networks, and making it clear that certain territories are not available for expansion. He said it so casually, as if discussing a business merger, rather than what sounded like organized warfare. The details aren't your concern. They absolutely are my concern if I'm accepting your help. I moved away from the window, needing distance from his overwhelming presence. I won't be complicit in violence. I won't accept blood money or protection purchased through murder. I'm not asking you to be complicit in anything except your own survival. His expression hardened slightly. Victor Castillo has killed 7 journalists in 5 years. All of them thought they could expose him, publish their stories, hide behind press freedoms and law enforcement. All of them were wrong. You can be number 8. Or you can accept that sometimes survival requires compromising with people you'd prefer to avoid. That's not compromise. That's surrender. Call it whatever helps you sleep at night. The outcome remains the same. He finished his wine and set the glass down with deliberate precision. You can leave if you want. Walk out that door right now, go back to your apartment, take your chances with the cartel and your ex-boyfriend. I won't stop you. But you won't help me either. Help requires cooperation. Cooperation requires trust. Trust requires accepting that you don't have all the answers or all the power in this situation. He moved toward the door, then paused. Think about it tonight. Tomorrow morning, give me your answer. If you choose to leave, Marco will drive you wherever you want to go. If you choose to stay, we'll discuss terms. We already discussed terms. We discussed the framework. Terms involve specifics, boundaries, expectations on both sides. He looked back at me, his expression unreadable. I told you that you became useful the moment you photographed Victor Castillo. That wasn't a threat, Samantha. That was reality. The question is whether you're pragmatic enough to accept it. He left before I could respond, his footsteps silent on the hardwood floors. Sophia appeared moments later to collect the dinner tray, offering a quiet goodnight, before disappearing back to whatever part of the apartment she occupied. I stood alone in the sitting room, staring at the city lights beyond the window, trying to decide if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life, or the only choice that made sense. Sleep proved impossible, despite the comfortable bed and expensive sheets. I lay awake most of the night, my mind cycling through options, none of them particularly appealing. By the time dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, I'd made my decision. I found Alessandro in what appeared to be a home office, dressed already in another impeccable suit, speaking rapid Italian into his phone. He ended the call when he saw me, gesturing for me to enter. "You didn't sleep." It wasn't a question. Neither did you, apparently. I moved to stand in front of his desk, my spine straight, despite the exhaustion weighing on my shoulders. "I'll accept your terms. 3 months, delayed publication, exclusive access afterward. But I have conditions." "Of course you do." Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. "What are they?" "First, no violence against Ryan. I don't want him hurt, just kept away from me. Second, I want regular updates on your progress against the cartel. I'm not sitting in ignorance for 3 months. Third, I maintain control over my own story. You provide information, but I write the truth as I find it, not propaganda that serves your interests." "Fair enough." He stood, extending his hand across the desk. "Anything else?" "Yes. I want to know why Victor Castillo operating in your territory matters enough to risk this kind of exposure." "The real reason." Alessandro studied me for a long moment, his hand still extended. "He didn't ask permission before expanding his operations into areas I control. That kind of disrespect can't be tolerated in my world, or it invites others to test boundaries. That's still not the complete truth." "No," he agreed, "but it's all you're getting today. Trust is earned, remember? We're just beginning that process." I shook his hand, sealing an agreement I only partially understood with a man I definitely didn't trust. His grip was firm and warm, lasting a fraction longer than strictly necessary before he released me. "Welcome to protective custody, Miss Collins. I promised to make it as painless as possible." Somehow I doubted that very much. 2 weeks dissolved into a rhythm I hadn't expected to find comfortable. Mornings belonged to me alone, Sophia respecting my need for silence as I worked through coffee and researched background material for the eventual story I'd write. She'd leave breakfast on the kitchen counter, always something simple but perfectly prepared, eggs with herbs I couldn't identify, bread that tasted like it came from some hidden bakery that only served people who knew the right doors to knock on. The afternoon stretched long and quiet. I'd claimed the sitting room as my workspace, spreading documents and notes across the coffee table. My laptop opened to databases I probably shouldn't have accessed from Alessandro's Wi-Fi but did anyway. Sophia would appear periodically with tea or fruit, never commenting on the crime scene photographs I'd printed or the organizational charts mapping connections between various criminal enterprises. "Mr. Ricci called," she said one Thursday afternoon, setting down a plate of sliced pears and cheese I definitely hadn't requested. "He'll be joining you for dinner again tonight." Again had become the operative word. Alessandro appeared most evenings around 8, usually still wearing whatever suit he'd donned that morning, though his tie would be loosened and his sleeves rolled up in that way that suggested he'd been working with his hands rather than just signing documents. We'd eat whatever elaborate meal Sophia prepared, and he'd provide updates on his progress against Victor Castillo's operations. 3 of their distribution points have been shut down, he told me on Monday, cutting into chicken that had been prepared with lemon and something green I couldn't identify. Joseph's team intercepted 2 shipments heading to their processing facility. "Intercepted how?" I'd asked, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth. "Does the specific methodology matter?" "It does if I'm going to write about it eventually." He'd smiled at that, something close to genuine amusement crossing his features. "Seized by cooperative law enforcement acting on anonymous tips. No violence, no bodies, just empty trucks and very confused drivers who suddenly decided cooperation was preferable to prison time." I'd made notes on my phone under the table, cataloging details for later verification. Alessandro had noticed, of course. He noticed everything. But he'd said nothing, just continued eating while describing the financial pressure he was applying to businesses that laundered money for the cartel. The conversations had evolved beyond mere tactical updates. He'd started asking questions about my work, about the stories I'd covered before stumbling into his office, about why I'd chosen journalism in the first place. I'd answered cautiously at first, uncertain how much to reveal to someone whose entire life revolved around secrets and strategic information. But something about the way he listened, really listened without judgment or interruption, had loosened my tongue more than I'd intended. My parents died when I was 19. I'd told him on Wednesday. The words emerging without planning. We'd finished dinner and moved to the sitting room, Sophia having cleared the dishes and disappeared with her usual efficiency. Car accident on their way home from my college orientation weekend. Drunk driver crossed the median on the interstate. Alessandro had been holding a glass of wine, but he'd set it down carefully, his full attention shifting to my face. I'm sorry. Everyone says that. Sorry for your loss. Sorry for what happened. Sorry. 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 I'd stared at my own wine, watching the liquid catch the light. But sorry doesn't pay for funerals or settle estates or figure out how to finish a degree when your funding disappears because life insurance doesn't cover everything the brochures promise. So you worked. 3 jobs, morning shift at a coffee shop, afternoon classes, evening serving tables at whatever restaurant would hire someone with no experience. Weekends I worked retail. The memories felt distant now, softened by time but still carrying weight. Took me 6 years to finish a 4-year degree, but I did it without debt. Resourceful. He'd said it like a compliment rather than mere observation. That's rare. That's survival. There's a difference. Is there? He'd leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, his posture relaxed despite the intensity of his gaze. Most people in your situation would have quit, found easier paths, settled for less. You didn't. I couldn't afford to settle for less. My parents had plans for me, expectations. Giving up would have meant their deaths erased everything they'd worked for. I'd looked up then, meeting his eyes directly, so I kept going. Finished school, got an entry-level position at a small newspaper, worked my way up to the Metropolitan Daily. Every byline, every published story, that was me proving their faith in me, wasn't misplaced. And then you met Ryan. The transition had been smooth, almost gentle, but it still felt like stepping into cold water. And then I met Ryan. I'd told him about the whirlwind romance, the way Ryan had seemed perfect at first, attentive and generous, and genuinely interested in my work. How he'd encouraged me to quit one of my side jobs, offering to help with rent so I could focus on journalism. How that had escalated to quitting another job, then suggestions about which friends were really good for me and which were holding me back. Classic isolation tactics, Alessandro had observed, his voice neutral but his expression hard. Abusers always start by cutting you off from support systems. I know that now. Didn't recognize it then. The admission tasted bitter. By the time he first hit me, I had no one to call, nowhere to go. He'd moved me into his apartment, convinced me to cancel my lease to save money. My friends had stopped reaching out after I'd canceled plans too many times. I was completely dependent on him. But you still left. Eventually. After he broke my ribs, I'd wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the room. I realized the next time might kill me. So I waited until he left town, packed a bag, and ran. Alessandro had stood then, moving to the sideboard to refill his wine before settling into the chair closer to mine. You're stronger than you think, Samantha. Most people never find the courage to leave. Or they're just more desperate than brave. Same thing, often enough. The conversations had continued like that over subsequent nights, growing more personal, more intimate, despite maintaining careful physical distance. I'd learned that his father had built the family business from nothing, starting with a single restaurant and expanding into real estate and import operations. That his mother had died when he was young, too young to remember her clearly. That he had a sister somewhere in Europe, kept deliberately separate from his life for her own protection. Family is leverage, he'd said simply when I'd asked why. The people you love become targets. I learned that lesson early. Tonight marked the 14th night of this strange routine, and I'd grown comfortable enough to start dinner without waiting for Alessandro to arrive. Sophia had prepared something involving pasta and seafood, the smell of garlic and white wine filling the kitchen as she worked. "You're learning to relax," she observed, setting plates at the dining table. "When you first arrived, you looked like a rabbit ready to bolt at any moment. I'm not sure I've relaxed so much as accepted reality." I helped her with the silverware, falling into an easy rhythm we'd developed. "Running seems less practical when you're 42 floors up." She'd laughed at that, a warm sound that had become familiar over the past 2 weeks. "Mr. Ricci would never keep you here against your will. You know that, yes? Do I? Because it feels remarkably like very comfortable captivity. There are worse prisons than safety and good food." She'd glanced toward the elevator. "He's different with you, you know. More human." "Different how?" "He smiles. He lingers at dinner instead of eating quickly and disappearing back to work. He asked Joseph to adjust schedules so he can be here in the evenings." She'd touched my arm lightly. "In 15 years, I've never seen him make those kinds of accommodations for anyone." The observation had settled uneasily in my chest, a weight I didn't quite know how to process. Before I could respond, the elevator chimed, announcing Alessandro's arrival. He looked different tonight. Tired, certainly, with shadows under his eyes that suggested he'd been awake too long. But there was something else. A tension in his shoulders, a tightness around his mouth. He'd removed his suit jacket somewhere between his car and the apartment, and his white shirt bore dark stains that looked suspiciously like blood. "Are you hurt?" The question emerged before I could stop it. "It's not as bad as it looks." He moved past us toward the hallway, his gait slightly uneven. "Give me 10 minutes to clean up." But 20 minutes passed with no sign of him. Sophia exchanged glances with me, concern evident in her expression. Finally, I stood, ignoring her whispered caution, and walked down the hallway to the master suite I'd never entered. The door stood ajar. Through the gap, I could see Alessandro standing shirtless at his bathroom sink, attempting to clean a deep gash across his left shoulder blade. His reflection in the mirror showed frustration and pain he was clearly trying to manage alone. "You need help with that." I pushed the door open wider. He looked up sharply, our eyes meeting in the mirror. "I've handled worse. I'm sure you have. But right now, you're dripping blood on expensive tile and making a mess of what should be a simple cleaning process." I moved into the bathroom, washing my hands with the efficiency my mother had taught me years ago. "Sit down before you pass out." "I'm not going to pass out." "Humor me, anyway." He sat on the edge of the bathtub, surrender evident in the set of his shoulders. Up close, the wound looked worse than I'd initially thought. A clean slice that needed stitches, but would probably go untreated for reasons I could guess at. Men like Alessandro didn't show up at emergency rooms with knife wounds and expect no questions. I found first aid supplies in the cabinet, professional-grade materials that suggested this wasn't the first time injuries had been treated at home. Working as carefully as possible, I cleaned the wound with antiseptic that had to burn, despite Alessandro's complete lack of reaction. "What happened?" I kept my voice neutral, focused on my task, rather than the intimacy of touching his bare skin. Disagreement with some of Victor's people. They were unhappy about losing territory. His voice remained steady, despite what had to be considerable pain. Joseph got them to see reason eventually. Reason that involved knives, apparently. Reason comes in many forms. I worked in silence for several minutes, applying butterfly bandages to hold the edges of the wound together, covering everything with gauze and medical tape. The proximity forced awareness of details I'd been carefully ignoring during our dinners. The breadth of his shoulders, the subtle scars that marked his torso speaking to a life of violence I'd only glimpsed in abstract. The warmth of his skin under my fingers. "You're good at this." He spoke quietly, his voice seeming loud in the silence of the bathroom. "My mother was a nurse before she married my father. She taught me basic first aid, said every woman should know how to handle emergencies." I secured the last piece of tape. "There. That should hold until it starts healing, but you really should see a doctor. Can't afford the questions that would raise. Can't afford sepsis either." I moved to wash my hands again, needing distance from the electricity building between us. "You're not invincible, Alessandro. I never claimed to be." He stood, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Thank you for the medical attention." "You're welcome. I should have left then." Should have walked out of his bathroom, returned to the safety of my own room, maintained the careful boundaries we'd been preserving. Instead, I found myself asking, does it hurt? Yes. The honesty surprised me. But pain is just information. It tells you you're still alive. That's a depressing philosophy. That's survival in my world. His hand came up, fingers brushing along my jaw with unexpected gentleness. You understand survival better than most, Samantha. You've been living it for 4 months. The touch sent electricity through my nervous system, every cell suddenly hyper-aware of his proximity. I should have stepped back, should have reminded him about the boundaries we'd discussed, about the power imbalance inherent in our situation. Instead, I leaned into his hand, just slightly, just enough to acknowledge what was building between us. Alessandro. His name felt intimate on my lips. I know. He moved closer, his other hand settling at my waist. I know this is complicated. I know you're here because you have nowhere else safe to go. I know taking advantage of that would make me no better than the men who've hurt you before. Then why are you touching me? Because I can't seem to stop myself. His voice dropped lower, rough with something that might have been desire or frustration or both. Because for 2 weeks I've watched you exist in my space, drinking coffee at my table, asking questions no one else dares ask, challenging every assumption I make. Because you make me feel something I thought I'd lost the capacity for. What's that? Hope. The word hung between us, vulnerable and honest. Hope that maybe not everything in my life has to be calculated strategy and careful control. That maybe there's room for something real. I should have been frightened by the intensity of his confession. Should have recognized the danger of getting emotionally involved with someone like Alessandro Ricci. Instead, I found myself tilting my face up, closing the distance between us with deliberate intent. He met me halfway, his lips capturing mine with a hunger that had been building for weeks. The kiss started gentle, questioning, giving me space to pull away if I wanted. But I didn't want space. I wanted this. Wanted him. Wanted to feel something other than fear and exhaustion for just a few moments. His hand tightened at my waist, pulling me closer as the kiss deepened. I could taste wine on his lips, feel the barely controlled strength in his body, sense the careful restraint he maintained even in passion. My fingers traced the unmarked skin of his chest, mindful of his injury but unable to stop touching him. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against mine. This is a mistake. Probably. I didn't move away. You deserve better than this. Better than me. His voice carried an edge of self-recrimination. You deserve to choose without the pressure of gratitude or fear or dependence clouding your judgment. Stop telling me what I deserve and let me make my own choices. Even if those choices hurt you? Even then. I pulled back enough to see his face clearly. I'm not some fragile thing that needs protecting from every possible harm, Alessandro. I've survived plenty already. I know you have. But I won't be another person who takes advantage of your strength. He stepped away, putting physical distance between us, even as his eyes remained locked on mine. When this is over, when Victor Castillo is no longer a threat, and you're free to leave safely, if you still want this, I'll be here, but not while you're dependent on my protection. The nobility of it should have been touching. Instead, it felt frustratingly like rejection. So what? We just pretend nothing happened? We acknowledge what happened, and exercise restraint until circumstances change. He reached for a clean shirt hanging nearby. I won't compromise your agency by pursuing this while you're essentially my prisoner, no matter how gilded the cage. I wanted to argue, to point out that I'd kissed him back just as eagerly, that my choice to stay here was exactly that, a choice. But the exhaustion in his eyes stopped me, reminded me that he'd just been injured defending territory against a violent cartel, that his life existed in shades of gray I'd only begun to understand. Fine. I moved toward the door. But for the record, this is the most frustrating rejection I've ever experienced. His quiet laughter followed me down the hallway, somehow making everything both better and worse, simultaneously. The next morning, Joseph appeared during my coffee, his expression grim in a way that immediately put me on alert. Alessandro emerged from his office moments later, clearly having been summoned by whatever news the security chief carried. We have a problem, Joseph said without preamble. The private investigator Ryan hired was spotted doing surveillance on this building yesterday afternoon. He's identified the location. My coffee cup clattered against the saucer. How is that possible? I thought this place was secure. It is, Alessandro replied, his voice calm despite the tension evident in his shoulders. But determined people find ways. Joseph, what's our exposure? Minimal. The investigator saw someone matching Samantha's description enter the building, but he can't confirm which floor or apartment. Building security prevented him from accessing resident lists. Joseph pulled out his phone, showing footage of a man in a nondescript jacket loitering across the street. He's been there 3 hours so far today. Then it's time to move her. Alessandro's decision came quick and certain. The rural property is ready. Has been since day one. I can have her there within 2 hours. Wait. I stood, alarm bells ringing. Move me where? Alessandro turned to me, his expression unreadable. Somewhere your ex-boyfriend's investigator can't find you. Somewhere more secure than a city apartment, no matter how many floors up. The walls felt like they were closing in again. My brief moment of stability already crumbling. But looking at Alessandro's face, seeing the determination there, I realized this was always going to be temporary. Safety, in his world, meant constant movement, endless adaptation. All I could do was hold on and hope I survived whatever came next. The property sat at the end of a private road that wound through trees thick enough to block most of the autumn sunlight. Joseph had driven in silence for the full 2 hours, giving me time to process the abruptness of leaving the penthouse that had become unexpectedly comfortable. Now, staring at the mansion through the SUV's tinted windows, I felt the weight of isolation settle across my shoulders. It's bigger than I expected, I said, breaking the quiet. Mr. Ricci believes in being prepared for extended stays. Joseph pulled into a circular driveway, parking near broad stone steps leading to double doors. The property has 20 acres, all fenced and monitored. My team maintains a perimeter, but you'll have freedom to move around the grounds as you wish. Freedom within boundaries. The irony wasn't lost on me. Better than no freedom at all. He grabbed my bag from the back, the only luggage I'd accumulated during 2 weeks at the penthouse. Come on, let me show you around before I have to get back to the city. The interior matched the exterior's understated elegance. Hardwood floors gleamed under chandeliers that looked original to the building, probably a century old or more. The furniture skewed more traditional here than the penthouse's minimalism. Heavy pieces in dark wood that suggested permanence rather than transience. Someone had prepared for my arrival. Fresh flowers arranged in vases throughout the main rooms. Logs stacked beside fireplaces in both the living room and what appeared to be a library. Your room is upstairs, second door on the right. Joseph set my bag at the base of the staircase. Kitchen is fully stocked. There's a landline in every room, preset to reach me directly if you need anything. Cell service is spotty out here, but the Wi-Fi is solid. When will Alessandro visit? The question emerged before I could stop it, revealing more than I'd intended about how much I'd grown accustomed to his evening presence. Joseph's expression remained professionally neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Weekends, most likely. He's got situations in the city that require his attention during the week. But he'll call to check in daily. He doesn't need to do that. He'll do it anyway. Joseph moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. Miss Collins, I know this feels like you're being shuffled around, hidden away. But Mr. Ricci takes protection seriously. What happened to his sister, he won't let that happen to anyone else under his watch. His sister? But Joseph was already walking toward his vehicle, the conversation clearly over. The SUV disappeared down the tree-lined drive, leaving me alone in a house too large for one person, surrounded by security I couldn't see but knew existed somewhere in the surrounding forest. I spent the first day exploring, mapping the space like I'd learned to do in every new environment over the past 4 months. The kitchen held professional-grade appliances and enough food to survive a siege. The library contained books I'd been meaning to read for years, plus a desk with multiple monitors that someone had already configured with access to research databases I'd been using. The living room featured a fireplace large enough to stand in, and furniture comfortable enough to lose entire afternoons. My bedroom overlooked gardens that probably looked spectacular in spring, but now held only the browns and golds of approaching winter. Someone had thought to include a desk here too, positioned to catch natural light from the windows. My laptop fit perfectly in the space, almost like it had been measured for this exact purpose. The attention to detail should have comforted me. Instead, it felt like evidence of how thoroughly Alessandro controlled his world, anticipating needs before they arose, arranging circumstances to his specifications. I was safer here than I'd been anywhere in months, and somehow that safety felt more confining than any cage I'd occupied before. That night, the landline rang at precisely 8 o'clock. "You made it safely." Alessandro's voice carried clearly despite whatever distance separated us. Joseph is a good driver. I'd settled into the library, a fire crackling in the fireplace, one of the books from the shelf open on my lap. This place is beautiful. It belonged to my father. He'd use it when city life became too much. A pause, filled with sounds I couldn't identify. "Are you comfortable?" "As comfortable as someone under protective custody can be." I closed the book, giving the conversation my full attention. "Joseph mentioned something about your sister before he left. What did he mean?" Silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the connection had dropped. "Then, that's a conversation for another time. Preferably in person. Alessandro, how's your research progressing?" The deflection was smooth but obvious. "Joseph said you've been accessing the databases we set up." I let him change the subject, recognizing the boundaries he maintained even in conversation. We talked for 40 minutes about my work, about the story I was building from fragments of information, about Victor Castillo's operations, and how Alessandro's pressure was causing visible cracks in the cartel's infrastructure. 3 more distribution points closed this week, he told me. Victor is scrambling to maintain supply lines. He's getting desperate, which makes him dangerous, but also predictable. Predictably dangerous sounds like the worst combination. Depends on whether you're prepared for the predictability. His voice carried a note of satisfaction. We're making progress. Faster than I initially projected. The conversation ended with promises to talk again tomorrow. Alessandro's schedule apparently including daily check-ins, despite the demands on his time. I sat staring at the phone after hanging up, trying to reconcile the man who'd kissed me in his bathroom with the one who orchestrated the systematic destruction of criminal organizations. The weekend visits became the highlights of my solitary existence. Alessandro would arrive Friday evenings, usually bringing updates and occasionally fresh supplies that Sophia had packed. We'd eat dinner together in the formal dining room that felt too large for 2 people, then retreat to the library where firelight softened the angles of his face, and conversations grew more personal than tactical. "Tell me about your parents," he'd asked during his second visit. Wine glass balanced on the arm of his chair. "You mentioned they died, but nothing about who they were before." So I'd told him. About my mother's nursing career and her dreams of opening a clinic in underserved communities. About my father's work as a high school teacher, his passion for literature, his belief that education could transform lives. About Sunday dinners and family game nights, and the ordinary beauty of growing up loved. They sound like good people. Alessandro had watched me over the rim of his glass, his expression softer than I'd seen before. They were. I think about what they'd make of my life now, hiding in a mansion from criminals and ex-boyfriends. Not exactly the future they imagined. They'd probably be proud you survived, that you're still fighting to tell stories that matter. He'd leaned forward slightly. Your parents raised someone remarkable, Samantha. Don't diminish that by focusing only on current circumstances. The compliment had settled warmly in my chest, a counterweight to the isolation and uncertainty. 3 weeks into my rural exile, Joseph appeared unexpectedly on a Wednesday afternoon. His expression carried tension that immediately put me on alert. We had an incident last night. He stood in the library doorway, his usual professional demeanor slightly fractured. The investigator your ex hired tried to breach the property perimeter around 2 a.m. My team intercepted him before he got within half a mile of the house. My coffee went cold in my hands. Is he dead? No. Injured enough to require hospitalization, but nothing permanent. Joseph moved into the room, his movements controlled despite obvious fatigue. He's being treated for a broken arm and some bruising. Local police are calling it a hiking accident in restricted woods. But it wasn't an accident. It was a clear attempt to locate you, using night vision equipment and a GPS tracker probably placed on one of our supply vehicles. Joseph's jaw tightened. We've swept everything. He won't try again. How can you be sure? Because Mr. Ricci is having a conversation with Ryan Mitchell as we speak, making it clear that further attempts to locate you will have consequences neither of them want to face. The casual mention of consequences sent ice through my veins. What kind of consequences? The legal kind. Mr. Ricci's lawyers have compiled evidence of stalking, violation of restraining orders, and conspiracy to commit trespass. If Ryan persists, he'll face criminal charges that will destroy his career. Joseph's expression softened slightly. No violence, Miss Collins. Mr. Ricci gave you his word about that. I spent the rest of the day pacing the property, walking the gardens despite the autumn chill, trying to process how thoroughly my life had become entangled with Alessandro's world. By the time his car appeared Friday evening, I'd worked myself into a state of conflicted fury. He found me in the library, a fire blazing against the evening cold. My laptop open to an article I'd been trying and failing to write for 3 hours. You're angry. He'd barely entered the room before making the observation. I'm frustrated. I closed the laptop with more force than necessary. Frustrated that people I've never met are making decisions about my safety without my input. Frustrated that I'm trapped here while Ryan apparently required a personal warning and his investigator needed to be hospitalized. Would you prefer we'd done nothing? Let the investigator find you? Allowed Ryan to continue his obsessive pursuit? I'd prefer to be treated like an adult capable of understanding the full situation, rather than a child who needs protection from harsh truths. I stood, needing movement to channel the energy coursing through me. You keep me here, safe and isolated, while orchestrating responses to threats I only hear about after the fact. That's not protection, Alessandro. That's control. He was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he moved to the sideboard, pouring 2 glasses of wine before settling into his usual chair. You're right. The admission caught me off guard. What? You're right. I've been making decisions about your safety without adequate consultation. That's how I'm accustomed to operating, controlling variables, minimizing risks, keeping people safe by keeping them uninformed. He took a slow sip of wine. But you're not one of my soldiers or business associates. You deserve transparency. So give it to me. I took the glass he'd poured, sitting across from him. Tell me everything. The full picture, not the sanitized version. He studied me for a long moment, then began talking. About Victor Castillo's increasing desperation as supply lines collapsed. About the violence erupting in territories where the cartel tried to maintain control. About Ryan's escalating behavior, the emails and messages sent to my former colleagues, the attempts to access my bank accounts and social media. He's unraveling, Alessandro said quietly. Men like him often do when they lose control of what they believe belongs to them. Joseph's team has been monitoring him closely. The investigator's hospitalization pushed Ryan to make mistakes, sending threatening communications that gave my lawyers everything they needed to pursue criminal charges. And the investigator himself, being strongly encouraged to accept a financial settlement in exchange for dropping Ryan as a client and signing a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Alessandro's expression remained neutral. He'll take it. The alternative is messier for everyone involved. I absorbed this, trying to reconcile my instinctive resistance to his methods with the pragmatic effectiveness they demonstrated. You're good at this. Managing people, controlling outcomes, arranging circumstances to serve your purposes. It's what I was trained to do from childhood. My father believed in preparation, in understanding leverage, in maintaining control of every situation. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the carefully maintained facade. But even the best preparation can't prevent every disaster, can't account for every variable. What happened, Alessandro? Joseph mentioned your sister, but then wouldn't elaborate. He was silent so long I thought he might deflect again, change the subject to safer territory. Instead, he set down his wine glass and leaned back, his gaze fixed on the fire. Her name was Julia, 8 years younger than me, which made her barely 18 when she died. His voice carried a flatness that suggested carefully controlled emotion. She was everything good about our family. Artistic, compassionate, seeing beauty in things I'd been trained to evaluate, only for strategic value. I waited, sensing he needed space to tell this story at his own pace. I was 26, still learning the business, still proving myself worthy of the empire my father had built. A rival organization, Russians operating out of Brooklyn, they wanted leverage against our family, wanted to force us out of certain territories they'd decided should be theirs. His hands clenched briefly. They took Julia, grabbed her walking home from her art class on a Tuesday afternoon, sent photos to prove they had her, made demands. Ransom? Territory and money. $10 million in complete withdrawal from the waterfront properties my father had spent 20 years developing. Alessandro's voice grew colder. My father refused. Said giving in to extortion would make us look weak, invite similar attempts from other organizations. He believed I could find her, rescue her before they followed through on threats. My stomach clenched, already knowing how this ended. I tried. God, I tried everything. Called in every favor, activated every informant, put every resource toward locating where they were holding her. His voice cracked slightly. We found the location 3 hours after they killed her. 3 hours too late because I spent time being cautious, being strategic, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike, instead of accepting that messy and fast was better than careful and slow. That wasn't your fault, wasn't it? He looked at me finally, his eyes holding pain he'd clearly never fully processed. I made the choices. I prioritized caution over speed. I told myself I was being smart, minimizing risks, ensuring success. And while I was being smart, my 18-year-old sister was dying in some warehouse, probably calling for me, wondering why I wasn't saving her. I moved without thinking, crossing the space between us to kneel beside his chair. You can't know what she was thinking. You can't torture yourself with assumptions about her final moments. I know she died alone and afraid because I failed her. His hand came up to cup my face, thumb tracing my cheekbone with devastating gentleness. That's why I won't fail you, Samantha. Why I'm maybe overprotective, maybe too controlling. Because I swore standing over her grave that I'd never again lose someone I could have saved. Never again prioritize strategy over the life of someone I care about. The confession hung between us, raw and honest, explaining so much about his behavior over the past weeks. Is that why your other sister lives in Europe? I sent her away the day after Julia's funeral. Gave her a new identity. Substantial finances, instructions never to contact me directly. She's safe because she's separate from my world completely. His hand dropped away from my face. That's what caring about people costs in my life. Either hypervigilant protection or complete separation. There's no middle ground. Alessandro, you should go to bed. It's late, and I've burdened you with history that doesn't change current circumstances. He stood, distancing himself physically and emotionally in one smooth movement. Tomorrow we'll discuss next steps regarding Victor and Ryan. Figure out timelines for when you might be able to return to normal life. But I didn't want to discuss timelines or strategy. I wanted to tell him that his sister's death wasn't his fault, that trauma and guilt were distorting his perspective, that protection didn't have to mean control. Except I wasn't sure any of that was true in his world, where violence lurked beneath every surface, and caring about people truly did make them targets. So instead, I said goodnight and retreated to my room, lying awake until dawn, trying to reconcile the man who'd kissed me with careful passion against the one who carried the weight of his sister's death, like a stone around his neck. Understanding, I realized, was not the same as knowing how to help, and falling for someone whose every protective instinct stemmed from catastrophic failure felt like walking deliberately toward heartbreak. But apparently I was doing it anyway. 7 weeks. Nearly 2 months of existing in a state of suspended animation. My life on hold while Alessandro systematically dismantled Victor Castillo's operations, piece by careful piece. The waiting had worn grooves into my patience, smoothed my resistance into something closer to acceptance than I'd ever intended. The call came on a Thursday morning, Alessandro's voice carrying a satisfaction I'd learned to recognize over our nightly conversations. It's done. No preamble, no build-up. Joseph compiled everything into a comprehensive package. Financial records, witness statements, documented movements of contraband. Everything the FBI needs to bring down Victor's entire North American network. I'd been drinking coffee in the library, watching frost patterns form on the windows as autumn surrendered to early winter. Now I set the mug down carefully, hardly daring to believe. You're certain? The evidence is airtight. Joseph built anonymous channels months ago specifically for situations like this. Untraceable back to us, but completely credible to federal investigators. A pause filled with sounds of movement, papers shuffling. I'm sending you copies of everything right now. Verify it against your own research. If it holds up to your journalistic standards, it'll hold up in court. I spent the next 6 hours reviewing documents that appeared in my secure email. Financial transactions traced through shell corporations, witness testimony from low-level operatives willing to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences, surveillance photographs showing Victor Castillo personally directing operations the FBI had been trying to infiltrate for years. It was comprehensive, damning, exactly the kind of evidence that could dismantle an organization from the inside out. More importantly, it was everything I needed to write the story I'd been building since that night in the Sapphire Casino. Senator Harrison's involvement was documented with precision that would end his political career. The money laundering network was mapped completely. Even the corrupt officials who'd enabled the operation were identified with supporting evidence. "This is incredible," I told Alessandro when he called that evening. "This is a Pulitzer-level investigation. Then write it." His voice carried warmth I'd grown to crave during our weeks of separation. "Your editor will want to see you in person. How soon can you be ready to come back to the city?" The question triggered something between excitement and trepidation. "When?" "Tomorrow. I'll pick you up myself. We'll meet with your editor, discuss publication timelines, handle the logistics of bringing you back into the world." A beat of silence. "If you're ready." Was I ready? Ready to leave the safety of isolation? To face whatever remained of the threats that had driven me into hiding? Ready to see Alessandro in person after weeks of carefully maintaining emotional distance through phone conversations? Yes. The word emerged more certain than I felt. "I'm ready." He arrived late morning, his car winding up the private drive with familiar precision. I'd packed the night before, not that I'd accumulated much during my rural exile. When I opened the door, the sight of him struck me with unexpected force. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes suggesting too many late nights, but his expression when he saw me carried something that made my breath catch. "Samantha." My name on his lips felt like coming home. "You look exhausted." Dismantling criminal empires is surprisingly time-consuming. He took my bag, his free hand finding the small of my back as he guided me toward the car, but worth it for this moment. Joseph drove us back to the city, giving Alessandro and me privacy in the back seat to discuss strategy for my meeting with the editor. But the conversation kept drifting to other topics. Observations about the changing seasons, questions about books I'd been reading, the comfortable intimacy of two people who'd been living in each other's thoughts, even while physically separated. "I missed you." I said it quietly, almost afraid to acknowledge the depth of feeling that had developed during our nightly phone calls. His hand found mine, fingers interlacing with a certainty that felt inevitable. "I've missed you every day." These past weeks, the hardest part wasn't dealing with Victor or managing territory disputes. It was knowing you were alone out there, knowing I'd put you in that isolation. You didn't put me anywhere. I chose to accept your protection. Choice made under duress isn't really choice. His thumb traced patterns across my knuckles. "But we can debate philosophy later. Right now, focus on your meeting. Show your editor what real investigative journalism looks like." The meeting exceeded my expectations. My editor, a woman named Patricia who'd been skeptical of my abilities for years, reviewed the evidence with growing astonishment. Her questions came rapid fire, testing the sources, verifying the documentation, pushing for details only someone who genuinely investigated would know. "This is exceptional work, Collins." She'd looked up from the documents, her expression transformed from doubt to respect. "This is the kind of story that defines careers. How soon can you have the full article written?" 2 weeks for the first draft, another week for revisions and fact-checking. Do it. Front page, above the fold, full investigative series. Patricia had extended her hand, her grip firm. "Welcome back to real journalism." Walking out of that office felt like vindication. Like every risk I'd taken had been justified by this moment of professional recognition. Alessandro waited in the lobby, his presence drawing attention from everyone who passed. When he saw my expression, his answering smile held genuine pleasure. "Good news?" "The best." Front page feature, full series, everything I've been working toward. The euphoria bubbled up, making me reckless. Thank you. For the evidence, for the protection, for making this possible. You did the work. I just provided resources. He guided me toward the exit, his hand returning to that spot at the small of my back that had become familiar. But we should celebrate properly. Dinner somewhere private where we can talk without interruption. The restaurant he chose occupied the top floor of a building I'd admired from street level, but never entered. A private dining room awaited us, table set for two with candles already lit, and wine breathing in a crystal decanter. The view overlooked the city as lights began illuminating against the gathering dusk. This is beautiful. I moved to the window, watching the urban landscape transform into something almost magical in the fading light. It seemed appropriate for the occasion. Alessandro joined me, close enough that I could feel his warmth. 7 weeks ago, you ran into my office with photographs that changed everything. Tonight, you walked out of a meeting that will change everything again. That deserves recognition. We ate slowly, trading stories from our separation. He told me about the final moves against Victor's organization, the carefully orchestrated pressure that had forced the cartel leader to abandon his North American ambitions entirely. I described the solitude of the rural property, the strange comfort of isolation, the way I'd grown accustomed to our nightly phone calls. I'd wait for 8 o'clock like it was a lifeline. I admitted over wine that tasted like liquid silk. Your voice became the only consistent thing in days that all blended together. I'd rearrange entire schedules to make sure I could call. His eyes held mine across the table. Joseph started joking about it, how the fearsome Alessandro Ricci scheduled his criminal empire around phone calls with a journalist. Former criminal empire, I corrected. You told me Victor's operations are finished here. They are. The FBI raids start tomorrow morning. By this time next week, everyone you photographed that night will be facing federal charges. He set down his glass, which means the primary threat against you is neutralized. You're safe now, Samantha. Truly safe. The words should have brought relief. Instead, they triggered awareness of what safety meant. No more justification for protection. No more reason to remain in Alessandro's orbit unless I chose to. And Ryan? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. His situation is more complicated but equally resolved. Alessandro's expression grew colder when discussing my ex. The hospital visit from his investigator triggered something. Ryan started making mistakes, sending emails to your former colleagues that crossed legal boundaries, attempting to access your bank accounts in ways that left digital footprints. My lawyers collected everything, presented it to prosecutors along with your original hospital records from when he broke your ribs. I'd hidden those records with shame, never reporting the injury properly, telling emergency room staff I'd fallen downstairs. How did you get those? Hospitals keep records. Records can be legally subpoenaed when there's evidence of ongoing criminal behavior. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. A permanent restraining order was issued yesterday. Ryan violated it within 3 hours by attempting to contact your editor. He's now facing criminal charges for stalking, assault, and violation of protective orders. His lawyers are negotiating a plea deal that will include mandatory counseling and a requirement to have no contact with you and to stay far away from your city and your life. The information should have felt like victory. It wasn't a fairy tale kind of safety, but it was the first concrete boundary the law had ever drawn on my behalf. Instead, it felt like the final piece of a puzzle I hadn't realized I'd been assembling. You've solved all my problems. I've addressed immediate threats. Your problems are your own to solve. His hand tightened on mine. But I wanted you to have choices, Samantha. Real choices not made under pressure of fear or survival. That's what tonight is about. What do you mean? He stood, moving around the table to stand beside me, his hand extended. Dance with me. There's no music. There doesn't need to be. I took his hand, letting him pull me to my feet and into his arms. We swayed gently in the candlelit silence, his chest solid against mine, one hand at my waist while the other cradled my hand between us. The intimacy of it felt more profound than any conversation we'd had over the past 7 weeks. I've been trying very hard to be noble, he said quietly, his lips near my ear. Keeping distance, maintaining boundaries, ensuring you had space to make decisions without pressure. But nobility is exhausting, and I'm running out of reasons to deny what I feel. My heart hammered against my ribs. What do you feel? That 7 weeks away from you was 7 weeks too long. That hearing your voice on the phone stopped being sufficient somewhere around week 3. That watching you walk out of your editor's office with triumph written across your face made me want things I have no right to want. He pulled back enough to see my face. That I'm falling for you despite every logical reason not to, and I'm tired of fighting it. The confession hung between us, vulnerable and honest. I could step back, maintain the distance he'd been preserving for my sake. Could remind him about power dynamics and complicated circumstances. Could be sensible and careful and protect myself from potential heartbreak. Or I could be honest too. I've been waiting for you to stop being noble. I reached up, my hand finding the back of his neck. Waiting for you to acknowledge what's been building between us since that first night. Waiting for permission to want this without guilt. Permission granted. His voice dropped lower, rough with restrained desire. If this is what you want. If you're choosing this freely without pressure or... I kissed him before he could finish the sentence, eliminating the space between us with deliberate intent. His response was immediate, pulling me closer as the kiss deepened into something that had been building for nearly 2 months. This wasn't the careful, questioning kiss from his bathroom. This was certainty, hunger, the release of tension carefully maintained through weeks of separation. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against mine for a long, unsteady heartbeat. Come home with me. Let me show you what it looks like when I'm not being noble. The penthouse felt different walking through the door with Alessandro's hand in mine, awareness crackling between us with each step. Sophia emerged from the kitchen, took one look at our expressions, and smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd been expecting this development. Welcome back, Miss Collins. Her eyes twinkled with unmistakable approval. Should I prepare the guest room or... That won't be necessary. Alessandro's voice carried quiet finality. Thank you, Sophia. We'll see you in the morning. She disappeared with practiced discretion, leaving us alone in the vast space. Alessandro turned to me, his expression serious despite the desire evident in his eyes. Last chance to change your mind. Once we cross this threshold, everything changes. I've been ready for everything to change since you stopped being just the dangerous stranger who helped me. I moved closer, my hands finding the buttons of his shirt. Stop giving me exits and let me make my choices. His laugh was quiet, almost relieved. As you wish. The night dissolved into sensations I'd been denying myself for weeks. Alessandro's hands mapping skin he'd only seen in passing. The slide of expensive sheets against bare legs. Whispered confessions in darkness broken only by city lights through floor-to-ceiling windows. Connection that went beyond physical, touching something deeper I hadn't known was possible. Morning arrived with sunlight painting the bedroom in shades of gold. Alessandro slept beside me, his face softened in repose, the careful control he maintained constantly finally abandoned in sleep. I traced the scar on his shoulder from the knife wound I'd bandaged weeks ago, watching the steady rise and fall of his breathing. You're staring. His voice emerged rough with sleep, though his eyes remained closed. Admiring. There's a difference. He pulled me closer, pressing a kiss to my forehead. Good morning. Good morning. The intimacy of waking together felt simultaneously natural and surreal. No regrets? None. You? Not even close. We lay tangled together until the smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. Sophia's discreet signal that morning had officially arrived. Alessandro pulled on sleep pants while I borrowed his shirt, both of us moving with the ease of people comfortable in each other's space. Sophia was arranging breakfast at the kitchen counter when we appeared, her expression carefully neutral, except for the knowing smile she couldn't quite suppress. Good morning. Coffee is fresh, and there are pastries from the bakery you like, Miss Collins. Thank you, Sophia. I settled onto a bar stool, accepting the coffee she poured. Everything smells wonderful. It's good to see you both looking happy. She busied herself with breakfast preparations. The house has been too quiet with only Mr. Ricci here. Alessandro's hand found mine under the counter, our fingers interlacing automatically. The gesture felt both new and familiar, like something we'd been building toward since that first night in his office. We spent the morning in comfortable domesticity, trading sections of the newspaper, discussing publication strategy for my article, existing in each other's space, without the careful boundaries that had defined our previous interactions. It felt like the beginning of something real, something chosen, rather than imposed by circumstances. I should get back to work on the article, I said eventually, reluctant to break the spell but aware of approaching deadlines. Patricia wants the first draft in 2 weeks. Use the office here. Everything you need is already set up. Alessandro glanced at his phone, frowning slightly. I have meetings this afternoon, but I'll be back for dinner. We should discuss what comes next. What do you mean? Your apartment isn't safe yet. Ryan's legal situation is pending, and there are always residual concerns after taking down an organization like Victor's. He pulled me close, his arms circling my waist. Stay here while you write the article. After that, we'll figure out what this looks like long term. This. I gestured between us. You mean us. I mean us. He kissed me softly. If that's what you want. A real relationship. Not protection or convenience or anything except two people choosing each other. The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability evident despite his usual control, made my chest tight with emotion. I wasn't quite ready to name. I want that. Then we'll figure it out together. He pressed another kiss to my forehead before stepping back. But right now, I need to handle business. And you need to write the story that's going to end careers and topple criminal enterprises. We'll celebrate tonight. He left with promises to return by 7, leaving me alone in the penthouse that had become unexpectedly familiar. I settled into the office he'd mentioned, finding my research materials already organized, my laptop configured with access to everything I needed. Sophia brought lunch at noon, sandwiches and fruit arranged on a tray she set on the desk. He's happy with you, you know. Happier than I've seen him in years. I'm happy with him too. The admission felt significant, acknowledging feelings I'd been carefully avoiding examining too closely. Even though this is complicated, and probably inadvisable in about 17 different ways. Love usually is. She smiled gently. But that doesn't make it less worthwhile. Love. The word hung in my thoughts long after she'd left, refusing to be dismissed despite my attempts at rationality. Was that what this was? Love developing between two people thrown together by circumstance, grown through weeks of conversations and careful vulnerability, solidified by nights of physical connection. Maybe. Probably. Definitely. The realization should have terrified me. Instead, it settled like certainty in my chest, solid and undeniable despite all the logical reasons to resist. I was falling in love with Alessandro Ricci, and apparently I was going to let myself fall completely. The article went live on a Tuesday morning, dominating the Metropolitan Daily's front page with a headline that would force resignations before lunch. Senator Harrison's criminal enterprise, a year-long investigation exposes corruption at the highest levels. My byline sat above 3,000 words of meticulously documented evidence, supported by photographs that left no room for doubt. By noon, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Other journalists requesting interviews, television producers offering segments, even book agents suggesting I expand the investigation into a full manuscript. Patricia fielded most of the calls, her earlier skepticism transformed into fierce protection of her suddenly valuable reporter. Collins, you've got CNN requesting a live interview tonight. She appeared in the doorway of the conference room I'd commandeered as temporary workspace. And the Washington Chronicle wants to discuss a position. Senior investigative correspondent, national beat, substantial salary increase. Washington Chronicle, one of the most prestigious newspapers in the country. The kind of position journalists spent entire careers aspiring toward. When do they want to talk? Thursday morning. I told them you'd call to confirm. Patricia's expression softened slightly. This is the big leagues, Samantha. The kind of opportunity that doesn't come twice. Don't let loyalty to this paper hold you back. I spent that evening at the penthouse with Alessandro, discussing the offer over dinner Sophia had prepared with obvious pleasure at having both of us present. He listened carefully as I outlined the position's scope, the resources I'd have access to, the stories I could pursue with national reach. You should take it. His certainty surprised me. Just like that? No discussion about what it means for us? What it means is your career advancing exactly as it should. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. I won't be the reason you limit your potential, Samantha. We'll figure out the logistics of Washington and New York. People manage distance all the time. Do they? People in your world? I gestured vaguely, encompassing everything his life entailed. Because it seems like your world requires proximity, physical presence. My world is adapting. Something flickered in his expression. Vulnerability carefully controlled. I told you I'm transitioning away from the less legitimate aspects of the business. That process accelerated over the past weeks. Joseph is taking over operations I used to handle personally. Within 6 months, I'll be running only legitimate enterprises, all of which can be managed from anywhere with internet access. The confession caught me off guard. You're really doing that? Leaving that life completely? For you, yes. But also for myself. He stood, moving around the table to pull me to my feet. I've spent 8 years building an empire based on control and fear and strategic violence. Maybe it's time to build something different. Something that doesn't require constant warfare to maintain. We spent the night tangled together, discussing possibilities and timelines, imagining futures that seemed suddenly within reach. I fell asleep secure in his arms, content in ways I'd forgotten were possible. The next morning started ordinarily. Alessandro left early for a meeting, kissing me goodbye with promises to return for lunch. I worked on follow-up articles Patricia had requested, fielding interview requests, enjoying the validation of professional recognition. Sophia brought coffee and pastries, commenting on how nice it was to see the penthouse filled with life again. I was reviewing notes for the Washington Chronicle call when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Miss Collins? The voice was male, accent suggesting origin south of the border. You've caused my associates considerable trouble with your article. Ice flooded my veins. Who is this? Someone who believes in consequences. Someone who thinks Alessandro Ricci should understand what it costs to destroy other people's livelihoods. A pause filled with menace. Walk out of the building in 5 minutes. Alone. Get into the black sedan waiting at the corner. If you call anyone, if you alert security, people will die. Starting with the nice housekeeper currently humming in your kitchen. The phone went dead. My hands shook as I stared at the screen, mind racing through options that all led to terrible outcomes. Call Alessandro? But they were clearly watching somehow. Knew Sophia was here, probably had people positioned to make good on threats. Alert building security? Same problem, potentially more casualties. 5 minutes. I had 5 minutes to decide if I was walking into a trap or condemning others to violence because I'd chosen self-preservation. Sophia appeared in the doorway, still humming, completely unaware of danger. The sight of her decided everything. I couldn't risk her life on the chance that threats were empty. I grabbed my phone, shoving it in my pocket, and called out as casually as I could manage. Sophia, I'm running out for a quick meeting. I'll be back in a few hours. Shall I have lunch ready for when you return? That would be wonderful, thank you. The elevator ride down felt eternal. The lobby passed in a blur of normal people conducting normal business, unaware that I was walking toward something catastrophic. The black sedan sat exactly where promised, rear door already open. I got in before I could reconsider. 2 men occupied the front seats, neither turning to look at me as the car pulled smoothly into traffic. The interior smelled like leather and something metallic I didn't want to identify. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Probably Alessandro calling, but I didn't dare answer with my captors this close. We drove for what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 45 minutes, ending in an industrial area I didn't recognize. Warehouses lined streets empty of pedestrian traffic, the kind of place where screaming would go unheard and unnoticed. They led me into one of the larger buildings, its interior stripped of equipment, leaving only bare concrete and shadows. 3 men waited inside, their expressions carrying the hardness of people for whom violence was merely practical. Miss Collins, the one who spoke, had been the voice on the phone. Thank you for being reasonable. Cooperation will make this much easier for everyone. What do you want? I kept my voice steady despite terror threatening to overwhelm me. Alessandro Ricci's empire. Or more specifically, his understanding that destroying ours comes with consequences. He pulled out his own phone, dialing with casual precision. Let's tell him you've joined us for an extended conversation, shall we? The next 18 hours dissolved into a nightmare of waiting and fear. They didn't hurt me, didn't need to when psychological torture proved more effective. Questions about Alessandro's operations, demands for information I didn't have, threats about what would happen if their ransom went unpaid, $2 million in complete withdrawal from territories they wanted to reclaim. Deliver both within 24 hours or I'd disappear the same way other problems disappeared in their world. They allowed me to use the bathroom once, escorted by armed guards who made clear that escape wasn't possible. Fed me water and a sandwich at some point, though I couldn't force more than a few bites past the nausea clenching my stomach. Let me hear Alessandro's voice on speakerphone when they called with their demands. His tone so controlled it scared me more than open rage would have. Don't hurt her. His words emerged precise, measured, containing fury beneath careful control. Whatever you want, we'll negotiate. Just don't hurt her. 48 hours, Ricci. Then we see how much your new girlfriend is really worth to you. The call ended, leaving me alone with my captors and growing terror that this was how I'd die. Not from Ryan's fists or Victor Castillo's assassins, but from 3 men angry about a story I'd written, taking revenge on the person Alessandro cared about because hurting him directly proved impossible. I thought about Julia, about Alessandro finding his sister 3 hours too late, carrying that guilt for 8 years, about how finding me dead would destroy whatever progress he'd made toward healing. The cruelty of history repeating felt almost unbearable, but history didn't repeat. Not this time. The door burst open with violence that made me scream, but the face that appeared belonged to Joseph, his expression carrying deadly purpose. Alessandro followed immediately after, his eyes finding mine with relief so profound it was almost physical. Step away from her. His voice contained no room for negotiation. This ends now. You brought the money? One of my captors moved closer, his hand finding the gun at his waist. I brought something better. $3 million in cash, completely untraceable, and guaranteed passage out of the country. Mexico, Canada, wherever you want to go. Alessandro moved forward slowly, hands visible, projecting calm, despite the tension vibrating through him. Take the money. Disappear. Live very comfortable lives far away from territories that don't belong to you. Or every resource I have focuses on hunting you down. Every contact, every favor owed, every piece of leverage I've accumulated over 15 years. I will destroy you so thoroughly that people will forget you ever existed. His voice dropped lower, colder, but that's messy and time-consuming, and keeps my people occupied when they could be doing more productive things. So I'm offering you a clean exit. Smart people take clean exits. The negotiation continued for what felt like eternity, but was probably 10 minutes. Alessandro's control never wavered, despite what I could see bubbling beneath the surface, rage and terror, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Finally, my captors agreed, greed and pragmatism overcoming whatever revenge they'd been seeking. Joseph produced duffel bags filled with cash I didn't want to think about the source of, documents promising safe passage, probably as fake as Alessandro had indicated they would be. The exchange happened quickly, professionally, as if hostage negotiations were merely business transactions to be conducted with appropriate efficiency. And then I was free, Alessandro's arms around me as Joseph secured the scene, my captors disappearing with their blood money into whatever fate Alessandro had actually arranged for them. You're safe. You're safe now. He repeated it like a mantra, his voice cracking slightly on the second iteration. I've got you. The delayed reaction hit like a physical blow. Sobs tore from my chest, fear and relief and trauma collapsing into uncontrollable shaking. Alessandro held me through all of it, one hand cradling my head against his chest while the other pressed against my back, keeping me anchored to something solid when everything felt like it was fragmenting. We stayed like that until the sobs subsided into hiccuping breaths, until Joseph's quiet, "We need to leave," penetrated the fog surrounding my thoughts. Alessandro lifted me easily, carrying me to the waiting vehicle as if I weighed nothing, settling me against him in the back seat, while Joseph drove us away from the warehouse district. I thought the words wouldn't form properly. I thought they were going to kill me. I know. His voice held a roughness I'd never heard before. I know, and I'm so sorry. This is my fault. My world, my enemies, Stop. I pulled back enough to see his face, shocked by the tears tracking down his cheeks. This isn't your fault. It is, though. It's exactly my fault. His hand came up to cup my face, thumb brushing away my own tears. When Joseph called to tell me you'd been taken, I was back in that moment 8 years ago. Finding out Julia had been grabbed, knowing I'd failed her, terrified I'd fail again. His voice broke completely. I couldn't lose you, Samantha. I can't lose you the way I lost her. You didn't lose me. I'm here. I'm safe because you found me in time. 18 hours. You were terrified for 18 hours because of me. The guilt in his expression was devastating. Because you wrote a story exposing people I'd helped you expose. Because you became visible in ways that made you a target. Because loving you made you vulnerable to people who want to hurt me. Alessandro, I love you. The confession emerged raw and honest. I'm in love with you, and it almost got you killed. That's the reality of my world, Samantha. That's what caring about me costs. The declaration should have been romantic, should have felt like a victory. Instead, it carried the weight of everything we'd both been through, all the trauma and fear and impossible choices that had brought us to this moment. I love you too. I said it quietly. Certainly. Despite everything. And yes, your world is dangerous and complicated and probably inadvisable in multiple ways. But you saved me, Alessandro. You found me in time. You did what you couldn't do for Julia. His arms tightened around me, his face buried against my hair as he cried in a way I suspected he hadn't allowed himself to since his sister's funeral. Joseph drove in silence, giving us privacy for this moment of complete vulnerability. By the time we reached the penthouse, the tears had stopped, replaced by exhaustion so profound I could barely stand. Alessandro carried me again, bringing me to his bedroom, helping me shower and change into comfortable clothes with gentle efficiency. Sophia appeared with tea and soup, her expression worried, but asking no questions. Sleep. Alessandro settled beside me, pulling me against his chest. Everything else can wait until you've slept. I drifted off, surrounded by his warmth and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Knowing that tomorrow would bring difficult conversations about Washington and safety, and whether love was enough to justify the danger his world represented. But for tonight, survival felt like enough. We were both alive, both safe, both damaged but together. Sometimes that had to be sufficient. Recovery proved more complicated than surviving. The trauma therapist Alessandro arranged specialized in kidnapping victims. Her office deliberately designed to feel safe rather than clinical. Soft lighting, comfortable furniture positioned to give clients control over personal space, windows that looked out on a garden rather than city streets. Tell me about the 18 hours. Dr. Rebecca Hale sat across from me during our first session, her voice gentle but direct. Not the facts, but what you felt, what you experienced internally. I'd tried describing it. The suffocating helplessness of being completely powerless. The way time stretched and compressed simultaneously, minutes feeling like hours while hours vanished into terrified haze. The certainty that I would die, that Alessandro would find me too late, that history would repeat itself in the cruelest possible way. I kept thinking about his sister. The words emerged hoarse, raw, about how he'd failed to save her, how finding me dead would destroy him. That felt worse than dying somehow, knowing my death would cement his guilt forever. That's a remarkable amount of empathy for someone experiencing severe trauma. Dr. Hale made notes on her tablet. You were more concerned about his emotional well-being than your own survival. Both. I was terrified for myself, but also terrified of what it would do to him if they killed me. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold, despite the room's comfortable temperature. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense for someone in love with a man who's already experienced catastrophic loss. She set aside her tablet. Love doesn't stop during crisis, Samantha. It often becomes more acute, more desperate. You were trying to survive both physically and emotionally, protecting yourself and him simultaneously. The sessions continued 3 times per week, gradually untangling the knots of trauma and fear and complicated love. Alessandro attended 2 sessions at Dr. Hale's request, sitting beside me as we discussed his guilt, his terror, his desperate need to protect what he couldn't afford to lose again. I can't promise I'll never be in danger again, I'd told him during one particularly difficult session. My career puts me in risky situations. Investigative journalism means talking to dangerous people, exposing criminal behavior, making enemies who might retaliate. I know. His hand had found mine, fingers interlacing with familiar certainty. But that's your choice to make, your risk to accept. I can't protect you from consequences of your own decisions. I can only make sure you have resources and support when facing those consequences. That's healthier thinking than 3 weeks ago, Dr. Hale had observed. Progress. Progress felt gradual and inconsistent. Some days I woke without immediate panic, comfortable in Alessandro's bed, secure in the knowledge of guards outside and Sophia's presence in the kitchen. Other days, unexpected sounds sent adrenaline flooding through my system, my body remembering captivity before my mind could rationalize current safety. Alessandro never pushed, never demanded more than I could give. He'd rearranged his schedule to be present most mornings, staying through breakfast before reluctantly leaving for meetings and business obligations. Sophia became a constant comforting presence, preparing meals I actually ate, talking about anything except kidnapping and cartels and fear. Joseph checked in daily, his updates delivered with matter-of-fact efficiency that somehow made them less frightening. Perimeter secure. No unusual activity. The 3 men who took you are no longer a concern. I didn't ask what no longer a concern meant specifically. Some knowledge felt better left unexamined. 3 weeks after the kidnapping, I felt stable enough to make decisions about the future, rather than just surviving the present. The Washington Chronicle had been patient, extending their offer despite my inability to commit immediately. Now, sitting across from Alessandro at breakfast, I raised the topic that had been simmering in the background. I want to take the position in D.C. I said it simply, watching his face for reaction. I know it complicates things between us, but this is the opportunity I've been working toward my entire career. I can't let fear make me turn it down. I never expected you to turn it down. He set down his coffee, giving me his full attention. I told you before, I won't be the reason you limit your potential. We'll make it work. How? You're based here. Your business, your operations, everything is in New York. My legitimate businesses can be managed remotely. The less legitimate operations are being transferred to Joseph permanently. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. I've already started expanding into Washington markets. Real estate developments, restaurant partnerships, import consulting. Within 6 months, I'll have legitimate reasons to be in D.C. regularly without raising questions. The casualness with which he'd been restructuring his entire empire caught me off guard. You've been planning this since you first mentioned the Chronicle's interest. I'm not letting geography separate us, Samantha. If you're in Washington, I'll find ways to be there too. We'll figure out the logistics of dividing time between cities until we decide where to build something permanent. Something permanent. The phrase hung between us, weighted with implications I wasn't quite ready to examine. Like what? Like whatever we want it to be. A relationship that exists in 2 cities, eventually maybe consolidating to 1. Marriage, if that's something you'd consider down the road. Children, if you want them. Or just partnership. Building careers and lives that complement each other. His expression softened. I'm not trying to pressure you into specific timelines or expectations. I'm saying I'm committed to figuring this out together, whatever form that takes. The conversation continued through breakfast and into the morning, discussing practicalities and timelines and security arrangements. Alessandro insisted on establishing a protection detail in D.C., a team led by Joseph's cousin who ran operations on the East Coast. I resisted initially, still bristling at the idea of constant surveillance, but the memory of that warehouse eventually convinced me that reasonable precautions weren't the same as suffocating control. They'll be discreet, Alessandro promised. You won't know they're there most of the time, but if something happens, if you need help, they'll respond immediately. Fine. But I get to meet them first, approve the arrangements. No strangers shadowing me without my knowledge. Agreed. His relief was palpable. Thank you for accepting this. I know it grates against your independence. Independence doesn't mean stupidity. I know I'm safer with protection than without it. I stood, moving to look out the window at the city sprawling below. But Alessandro, we need to talk about Ryan. What about him? You've been vague about his situation. I know there's a permanent restraining order, but that didn't stop his investigator from finding me before. What's actually keeping him away now? Alessandro was quiet for a moment, then joined me at the window. Ryan's life is falling apart in ways that have nothing to do with me directly. The obsession with finding you consumed him, made him neglect his actual career. He started making mistakes at work, cutting corners on compliance, falsifying reports to cover up errors. And you're telling me this happened naturally? Without any encouragement? The fraud was entirely his doing. The pressure that led to the fraud, that was partially environmental. Alessandro's voice remained neutral. When someone is stressed, distracted by personal obsessions, they make poor professional decisions. I may have ensured certain business deals he was managing faced unusual scrutiny, creating situations where his attention to detail became critical. So you set him up to fail. I created circumstances where his existing flaws became visible. The fraud itself, the falsified documents, the embezzlement from client accounts, that was all Ryan's choice. He turned to face me directly. My lawyers collected evidence and provided it to appropriate authorities. The district attorney's office issued an indictment last week. Ryan is facing multiple felony charges that will likely result in significant prison time. The information should have brought satisfaction. Instead, I felt only tired resignation. So, he's going to jail. Eventually, yes. His lawyers are negotiating a plea agreement, trying to minimize the sentence. Best case for him is probably 3 to 5 years. Worst case is closer to 15. Alessandro's hand found the small of my back, his touch grounding. He won't be able to hurt you again, Samantha. The restraining order is permanent, and even after serving time, he'll be under supervision that prevents contact. Did you arrange the cartel faction's elimination the same way? Creating circumstances, providing information, ensuring specific outcomes? His silence was answer enough. I need you to tell me the truth. I turned to face him fully. What happened to the men who kidnapped me? I paid them $3 million in marked bills. Every note was traceable through serial numbers Joseph had cataloged before the exchange. His voice remained steady, matter of fact. They took the money and fled to Mexico as agreed. Once they crossed the border, I contacted an organization that owed me favors, provided their location, their vehicle description, everything needed to intercept them. And then those men ceased to be a problem for anyone. The Brazilian organization I contracted handled it with efficiency I've come to expect from professionals. He watched my face carefully, gauging my reaction. I promised you I'd handle them. I did. Not personally, not with my own hands, but through channels that achieved the same result. I should have been horrified. Should have recognized this as exactly the kind of calculated violence that made Alessandro's world incompatible with mine. Instead, I felt only a cold pragmatism I hadn't known I possessed. They would have killed me if you'd paid them and let them go free. Probably, eventually. Or sold information about you to others who might want leverage against me. His hand cupped my face, thumb tracing my cheekbone. I won't apologize for eliminating threats to your safety, Samantha. I won't pretend to be civilized when it comes to protecting people I love. I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm asking you to be honest about what protection means in your world. I leaned into his touch, accepting the comfort despite its complicated source. And I'm telling you that I understand. That I'm choosing you anyway, knowing what that choice means. Even knowing I arranged for 3 men to die, even knowing that, the certainty in my voice surprised me. They kidnapped me, terrorized me, would have killed me without hesitation. I'm supposed to feel guilty that they're dead? I don't. I feel relieved. Alessandro pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me with careful strength. You're more pragmatic than I gave you credit for. I've learned from experience. Sometimes survival requires compromising ideals for reality. I pressed my face against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. No more secrets about my safety. If there are threats, if you're taking action, I want to know. Not after the fact. Not when it's convenient. I want to be informed and included in decisions about my own security. Done. The agreement came without hesitation. Full transparency about threats and responses. You have my word. We stood like that for several minutes, finding comfort in proximity and shared understanding. Eventually, Sophia appeared with fresh coffee and a gentle reminder that I had a call scheduled with the Washington Chronicle to finalize details of my new position. The conversation with my new editor lasted an hour, discussing start dates and assignments and expectations. They wanted me in DC within 3 weeks, enough time to find housing and relocate. The salary they offered was substantial, nearly double what I'd been making at the Metropolitan Daily. The resources at my disposal for investigations would be equally impressive. "This is happening," I told Alessandro after ending the call. "I'm really doing this. You're really doing this." His pride was evident. "When do you want to start looking at apartments? Next week, maybe? Give me time to finish recovery sessions with Dr. Hale, pack up my things from storage." I pulled up real estate listings on my laptop. The Chronicle offered relocation assistance, but most of what I'm seeing is either tiny or prohibitively expensive. "Let me help with that." He moved behind me, looking over my shoulder at listings. "Not pay for it," he added quickly before I could protest. "But I have contacts in DC real estate, people who can find properties that don't make it to public listings. Better deals, better locations, better security, as long as we're clear that I'm paying my own rent." "Absolutely. Though I reserve the right to occasionally stay over when business brings me to Washington. I think that can be arranged." I leaned back against him, feeling pieces of a life clicking into place. This is really going to work, isn't it? Us, this relationship, building something real despite all the complications. It's going to work, because we're both choosing to make it work. He pressed a kiss to the top of my head. "Geography is just logistics. We'll figure it out." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparations and final therapy sessions. Dr. Hale declared me stable enough to transition to remote sessions, though she recommended continuing weekly video calls for at least 3 months. I packed the belongings I'd accumulated during my time at the penthouse, sorting through clothes and books and research materials that had become familiar. Sophia cried when I said goodbye, hugging me with fierce affection. "You take care of him, yes? He's been different since meeting you. More human, more happy. I'll take care of him. You take care of yourself." Joseph drove me to Washington on a crisp November afternoon, Alessandro following in his own car with boxes that wouldn't fit in the SUV. The apartment his contacts had found exceeded expectations. A 2-bedroom space in a secure building with parking and natural light and room to actually work comfortably. This is perfect. I walked through empty rooms, imagining how they'd look furnished. "How did you find this?" "Connections." Joseph smiled slightly. "Mr. Ricci wanted you to have options. There are 3 other properties if you prefer different neighborhoods, but this one felt right. Close enough to the Chronicle's offices for easy commute, far enough from tourist areas to maintain privacy. Security that was thorough without being oppressive. A neighborhood with coffee shops and restaurants and bookstores. The infrastructure of normal life I'd been craving. Alessandro arrived with my boxes and his own contribution. A desk and chair he'd ordered specifically for my home office setup. We spent the evening unpacking and arranging furniture, creating a space that felt like mine, while acknowledging his presence in my life. "When will you be back?" I asked as we collapsed onto the couch we'd spent an hour positioning. "Friday. I have meetings in DC Thursday that will run late, so I'll just stay through the weekend." His arm draped across my shoulders, pulling me close. "Then probably every other week for the next few months. The expansion here is aggressive enough to justify regular presence. You're really restructuring your entire empire for this. I'm restructuring my life for you. The empire just has to adapt." He kissed me softly. "Worth it, by the way. In case you were wondering." I fell asleep that night in my new apartment, in my new city, starting my new career, with Alessandro beside me, and the future feeling more solid than it had in months. The trauma of kidnapping still lingered, would probably always linger in some form. Ryan still existed somewhere, facing consequences, but not erased from existence. The complications of loving someone from Alessandro's world remained present, would always remain present. But I was choosing this, choosing him, choosing a life that balanced danger with passion, independence with partnership, idealism with pragmatic reality. Sometimes that choice felt like surrender to circumstances beyond my control. Most of the time, it felt like the first genuinely free decision I'd made in years. 4 months in Washington transformed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. The work consumed me in the best possible sense. Investigations that spanned multiple states, stories that actually changed policy rather than just documenting problems. My editor valued my instincts enough to give me autonomy most reporters spent decades earning, trusting me to pursue leads that other journalists dismissed as too complicated or dangerous. The series I'd written about government corruption in federal contracting won a regional journalism award in February. By March, I was being nominated for national recognition that would have seemed impossible a year ago. My name appeared on mastheads and conference speaker lists, establishing credibility I'd fought my entire career to achieve. Alessandro kept his promise about regular visits. Every other weekend, one of us would travel to the other's city, falling into rhythms that felt increasingly natural despite the geographic distance. He'd appear at my DC apartment Friday evenings, bringing takeout from restaurants I'd mentioned wanting to try, settling into my space like he belonged there. Alternatively, I'd take the train to New York, where Sophia would greet me with genuine delight and dinners that probably violated several health guidelines regarding butter and cream ratios. "You look happy," she'd observed during one visit, watching Alessandro and me work side by side in his home office, our laptops occupying opposite ends of his desk. "Both of you. It's good to see." The transition in Alessandro's business operations progressed faster than he'd initially projected. Joseph had proven more than capable of managing the complex networks Alessandro had spent years building, handling situations with efficiency that freed Alessandro to focus on legitimate enterprises. By late March, Alessandro's involvement in anything remotely illegal had reduced to occasional consultation, advice given to Joseph, who then made independent decisions about implementation. "It's strange," he'd admitted one night in DC, lying in my bed with city lights painting patterns across the ceiling. 15 years building an empire through strategic violence and careful control. And now I'm just another businessman managing real estate portfolios and restaurant partnerships. "Do you miss it?" I'd traced idle patterns across his chest, my head pillowed on his shoulder. "Sometimes I miss the certainty, the clear rules about power and consequences. But mostly I feel relieved." His arm had tightened around me. I spent years being the person my father trained me to be, the person circumstances demanded. Now I get to choose who I want to become instead. That's worth more than any empire. Joseph became a constant in both our lives, managing security for Alessandro's operations while ensuring my safety remained prioritized. His cousin Marcus led my DC protection detail, a team so discreet I sometimes forgot they existed until situations arose requiring their presence. They'd intervened twice when sources for investigations turned hostile, their efficiency reminding me that my safety still required constant vigilance. "Marcus called this morning," Joseph had told Alessandro during one of my New York visits. "2 attempts to breach the perimeter at Miss Collins's building last week, both handled quietly, neither requiring escalation." "Attempts by whom?" I'd asked, immediately alert. "Competitors trying to intimidate you away from the defense contractor investigation." Marcus made it clear that approach wouldn't be productive. Joseph's expression had remained professionally neutral. "They've ceased contact." The investigation Joseph referenced became my most significant work yet, exposing systematic fraud in military supply contracts worth hundreds of millions. The story ran in April, generating congressional hearings and criminal referrals. My editor promoted me to senior correspondent, citing my ability to handle complex investigations while maintaining personal safety, a skill set apparently rare enough to warrant recognition. "Associate editor position is opening up in 6 months," Patricia had told me during a video call. "If you're interested, I'm recommending you for consideration. You've earned it, Collins." Associate editor. 2 years ago, I'd been serving tables and begging for bylines on community interest pieces. Now I was being groomed for editorial leadership at one of the country's most respected newspapers. The trajectory felt surreal, like someone else's life I'd accidentally stepped into. "You earned this through talent and hard work," Alessandro had reminded me when I'd expressed doubts. "Everything you've achieved, you built yourself. I just made sure you stayed alive long enough to do it." The gala invitation arrived in May, an annual fundraiser for children's literacy that attracted New York's elite philanthropists and business leaders. Alessandro had been invited as a significant donor, his legitimate businesses now generating enough revenue to make charitable contributions that drew positive attention. "Come with me," he'd asked over the phone. "I know galas aren't your favorite, but this one matters. Plus, Sophia has been talking about helping you find a dress for weeks. I think she's desperate to have input. Sophia's enthusiasm proved infectious. She dragged me to boutiques I couldn't have afforded a year ago, critiquing options with an eye for what would photograph well while remaining comfortable. We'd settled on a dress in deep sapphire blue, the fabric clinging in ways that made me feel elegant rather than exposed, the color making my eyes look almost luminous. Perfect, Sophia had declared, her approval clearly final. Mr. Ricci won't be able to take his eyes off you. The gala took place on a Saturday evening in late May, spring finally warming into something approaching summer. The venue was a hotel ballroom I'd written about once for an architecture feature, all soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers, and the kind of understated luxury that cost more than it appeared. Alessandro met me in the lobby, his expression when he saw me worth every moment of Sophia's determined shopping expedition. "You're stunning." He'd pulled me close, his kiss careful not to disturb the makeup I'd actually bothered applying. Absolutely stunning. The evening passed in a blur of introductions and small talk, Alessandro navigating social circles with the same strategic precision he'd once applied to criminal enterprises. People sought him out, business leaders and politicians and philanthropists, all eager to discuss potential partnerships or investment opportunities. His transformation from feared crime boss to respected entrepreneur seemed complete, at least in public perception. "You're good at this," I'd murmured during a quiet moment between conversations. "The networking, the socializing. You make it look effortless. Years of practice reading people and identifying leverage points. The skills transfer surprisingly well to legitimate business." His hand had found the small of my back, that familiar touch grounding me in the crowd. "Though I'd rather be home with you, eating takeout and arguing about which streaming service has better content." Around 10 o'clock, the formal program concluded, speeches about literacy and education giving way to music and dancing. Alessandro led me onto the floor, pulling me close as music swelled around us. Other couples creating a buffer of privacy despite the public setting. "I need to tell you something," he'd said quietly, his lips near my ear. "Something I've been planning for weeks." That sounds ominous. Not ominous. Terrifying, maybe, but hopefully in a good way. He'd pulled back slightly, his expression carrying vulnerability I'd learned to recognize. "I love you, Samantha. I'm in love with you in ways I didn't think I was capable of anymore. You've changed everything about how I see the world, about what I want from life." My heart had started pounding, sensing what was coming. "Alessandro, let me finish before I lose my nerve." He'd smiled slightly. 4 months ago, you moved to Washington to build the career you'd been working toward your entire life. I told you we'd make the distance work, that I'd find ways to be present without limiting your potential. I meant that, but I also want more." He'd stepped back then, his hand reaching into his jacket pocket to withdraw a small velvet box. Around us, I'd become aware of people noticing, conversations quieting as attention shifted to us. Alessandro had dropped to one knee with fluid grace, opening the box to reveal a diamond ring that caught light and threw it back in brilliant fragments. "I'm asking you to marry me. Not today, not next month, but eventually, when you're ready. I'm asking you to build a life with me, to take the partnership we've created and make it permanent." His voice had carried clearly despite speaking to me alone. "And I'm promising you that within 1 year, I'll have completely severed all connections to anything illegal. Every operation transferred, every tie cut, nothing remaining except legitimate businesses that you never have to feel conflicted about." The ballroom had gone silent, everyone watching this moment of public vulnerability, from a man known for careful control. I'd been aware of cameras, of witnesses, of the fact that this proposal would probably appear in society pages and gossip columns. None of that had mattered compared to Alessandro's face, hope, and fear and love written clearly for anyone to see. Yes, the word had emerged without hesitation, certainty flowing through me. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to partnership and permanence and building something real together. He'd stood, sliding the ring onto my finger with hands that trembled slightly, then kissed me with intensity that made me forget we had an audience. Applause had erupted around us, genuine and enthusiastic, celebrating a moment that probably seemed like simple romance to people who didn't understand everything it represented. The rest of the evening had passed in congratulations and champagne, well-wishers offering blessings for our future. I'd caught Joseph watching from the security perimeter, his expression carrying approval, and something that might have been relief. Even Sophia had appeared briefly, having somehow learned about the proposal, her eyes wet with happy tears as she'd hugged us both. 10 months later, I stood in the rural properties garden, watching preparations for the small wedding we'd planned. November had arrived with crisp air and trees painted gold and orange. The landscape transformed from when I'd lived here in frightened isolation. Now it felt like reclamation, taking a place associated with fear and filling it with celebration instead. "The caterers just arrived," Sophia called from the house, her organizational skills deployed in service of creating the perfect intimate ceremony. "And the florist needs to know where you want the arrangements positioned." "I'll handle it," Alessandro said, appearing beside me with coffee and a kiss. "You're supposed to be relaxing." I'm too excited to relax. The ring on my finger caught morning light, the symbol of promises kept and futures chosen. Can you believe this is actually happening? After everything we've been through? Yes, absolutely. He'd wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder as we looked out at the garden together. "You ran into my office terrified and desperate, and somehow we ended up here, building a life neither of us planned, but both of us chose." The year since his proposal had brought changes that fulfilled every promise he'd made. Alessandro now operated exclusively legitimate businesses. His criminal empire transferred completely to Joseph's management, with clear separation maintained between their operations. Auditors had verified the legitimacy of Alessandro's current enterprises, his taxes paid properly, his business practices scrutinized and approved by authorities who'd once considered him a target for investigation. My own career had continued its upward trajectory. The associate editor position had materialized as promised, my promotion announced in August, with responsibilities that included mentoring junior reporters and shaping investigative coverage. The work satisfied me in ways I'd never quite achieved as a solo journalist, combining my instincts for stories with opportunities to help others develop their own capabilities. Ryan existed somewhere in the federal prison system, serving a 5-year sentence for fraud and stalking-related charges. His lawyers had negotiated the plea agreement Alessandro's team had structured, accepting consequences that effectively ended his previous life. I rarely thought about him anymore. That chapter closed so thoroughly it felt like it belonged to someone else's history. The cartel faction that had kidnapped me had been handled exactly as Alessandro promised, eliminated by Brazilian organizations he'd contracted for that specific purpose. Victor Castillo himself had fled North America entirely after the FBI raids, his operations dismantled beyond any possibility of reconstruction. The territories he'd fought for had been absorbed by other organizations, or legitimized through law enforcement intervention. The power vacuum filled without Alessandro's direct involvement. 20 guests, I said, reviewing the final count. That's all we need. People who matter, people who know the real story. Sophia insisted on cooking despite my offers to hire professional caterers. Something about wanting to feed people who are family. Alessandro smiled against my hair. Joseph is serving as best man, as planned. Your editor is flying in from DC. Everyone who helped us survive is here to celebrate what we built from that survival. The ceremony took place in late afternoon. Golden light painting the garden as we exchanged vows I'd written myself, promising partnership and honesty and love that acknowledged complicated pasts while choosing better futures. Alessandro had cried during his vows, tears streaming unchecked as he'd promised to honor my independence while offering unwavering support, to protect without controlling, to love without consuming. Joseph had stood beside Alessandro with obvious pride. This man who'd been loyal through criminal enterprises now witnessing his boss become something healthier. Sophia had wept openly, her joy at seeing Alessandro genuinely happy evident to everyone present. Even Patricia had seemed moved, perhaps recognizing how far I'd traveled from the frightened reporter who'd once begged for meaningful assignments. At the reception afterward, small and intimate in the house's main rooms, I'd found myself standing with Alessandro, watching our chosen family celebrate around us. The trauma of everything we'd endured hadn't vanished, would probably never fully vanish. but it had transformed into something manageable. Scars rather than open wounds. History informing rather than controlling our present. I accepted protection from the most dangerous man I'd ever met. I'd said quietly, my hand finding Alessandro's, and discovered he was actually the person who'd free me completely, who'd help me become stronger and braver and more myself than I'd ever been before. You freed yourself, Alessandro had corrected gently. You made choices that required more courage than most people possess. I just made sure you survived long enough to become who you were always meant to be. Then we freed each other. I'd kissed him softly, tasting champagne and promise. That sounds about right. The evening had dissolved into music and laughter, toasts offered by people who knew our real story and celebrated anyway. Sophia's food proved as spectacular as promised, courses appearing with perfect timing, despite her claims of casual preparation. Joseph had given a speech about loyalty and transformation that probably revealed more than he'd intended about his own journey alongside Alessandro's. Later, lying in bed in the master suite with my husband beside me, I'd reflected on everything that had brought us to this moment. Running into that office 9 months ago, terrified and desperate, had been either the worst decision or the best decision of my life, depending on perspective. From one angle, it had pulled me into a world of violence and danger I'd never have encountered otherwise. From another, it had introduced me to partnership and love that transcended anything I'd imagined possible. What are you thinking? Alessandro had asked, his voice drowsy with exhaustion and contentment. That I'm grateful for everything, even the scary parts, because all of it led here. Here being married to a former crime boss with an inconvenient past and a tendency toward overprotective behavior. Here being married to the man I love, who kept every promise he ever made, who transformed his entire life because he believed our future was worth more than his past. I'd curled closer, fitting against him with familiar ease. That's not inconvenient. That's extraordinary. He'd kissed my forehead, his arms tightening around me. We're going to have a good life, Samantha. Built on honesty and choice and love that survives complications. We already do, I'd whispered, sleep pulling me under. We already do. And in that moment, secure in his arms with our future stretching bright before us, I'd believed it completely.